But that's a really great example of a salacious and titillating headline that's meant to pull people in to think that virtual reality is going to solve all their problems. And that's an example of what I wanted to bring tonight, of saying this is probably not a good idea to have either, well, in this case, it was a journalist that was pulling a headline that was too far from the origin of the story. And then additionally, there was an extra problem with this, which we're going to dig into, which was the origin facts of the story were actually not accurate as well. Okay. Let's see here. So this, I'm sorry for this slide. This actually violates the rule. It's big and white. I know you're all in the nosebleed section, so you can't read what it says. I'm going to describe to you what the slide says, so don't worry about reading what it says. This is an actual quote. This particular screen capture, by the way, is from 2017. It says, in a study carried out by the National Training Lab, retention rates for lecture-style learning were at 5%, and reading rates were at 10%, while the method of VR Learn had a retention rate of 75%. So there's your 75% that actually we believe the prior headline was trying to pull and actually put out there. But look at a little bit of what's talked about here. First of all, there is a kind of a brand name mentioned in that last sentence. That last little clause there says, while the method of VR Learn, so that's a sort of a brand or a company name, had a retention rate of 75%. So if you were analyzing that, the thing that you would get from that is that, okay, somehow around 2017, VR Learn existed. What is it? So you could go digging into what is that as a company name? Is it a consultancy? What is it? You could find that to see, do they have access to this data? Do they have access to, having a retention rate of 75%? Again, these numbers, when you just look at them, they're spectacular. They're claiming that from one level of learning, we're at 5 and 10%, and at another level, we've arrived at 75%. So huge increases in gains. These are disproportionately huge. We shouldn't see learning gains go up this quickly with something. But I want to go back and look at those first two clauses again, because that's where they seem to be claiming a source. In a study carried out by the National Training Lab, retention rates for lecture-style learning were at 5%, and reading rates were at 10%. So just hold that in your mind, because we're going to come to that 5 and 10%. We're going to come back to it in a second. But the National Training Laboratory, and actually I was just checking this was the last thing I checked right before I came in this room this evening to have this chat with you guys. I double checked it. The National Training Lab, I've turned my head and I'm looking at a different monitor now. The National Training Lab is now called the National Training Institute for Applied Behavioral Science. They were approached, and I only have dates on that one as recently, so 2000, late 2000 teens and into 2020. They were approached recently, and they do claim that they were the one that put out the study that had these numbers in it. They do acknowledge that that was theirs. They're not disavowing themselves as the source of these numbers, but to this day, they will not provide that original research. Okay, that's interesting. Let's keep going. There's a derivative. So that was an ad that came out last year. This is actually an ad that appeared in Great Britain. And you can see the similarities between what was quoted on the slide before and this slide. So now we're at, let me see if I'm trying to look at it myself, 5 to 10% of knowledge is retained when taking part in classroom-based training. Notice that? It just changed the phrase. It's no longer reading, lecture, classroom-based training. If you were a teacher, I'd be offended that they just called all classroom-based training reading and lecture. You guys do way more training style or learning styles than that, or different ways of, I'm trying to say, you do way more instructional approaches than that, compared to up to 75% when using VR. So one of my colleagues in the field of XR research actually, and I hope I'm not mistelling the story, but to my understanding of the story, in Great Britain, they actually have false advertising laws, and he actually went to the company that put out this statement and got them to retract it because it's all based on untrue or unfindable research studies. So we wouldn't do that quite so much in the United States. We'd say buyer beware, but it is possible to see ads that say this kind of situation. You can see how compelling and modern looking this ad is even looking. Let's look at the next slide. This I pulled off. Let me see if I can check my dates on this one. I pulled this tweet from my own Twitter feed from the Consumer Electronics Show last month, and I blocked off whose Twitter channel it was and any names of any people that were tagged in the tweet. But what you can see is, look, it's the same quote, basically, right? So you're seeing that 75% attached to VR, and you're seeing, ridiculously tiny percentages attached to anything that isn't VR, right? So notice how pervasive it is. And the only part I did leave on the slide that I didn't block out, that I kind of thought was ironic and sad, so I left it there, is this was a diversity session. And I'm like, wow, probably not the greatest session to be, sharing misinformation. Is a session where we're already trying to include more people in a healthy understanding of the benefits of virtual reality. And you bring up bad data, right? So this is all bad data, but look at how pervasive it is. This was January, last month. So really, it's still circulating. Okay, I didn't create this presentation to stand in front of you and say there isn't blood on my hands. I've actually taught this diagram in my teaching history. I'm sorry to say, right? Now, fortunately, I wasn't actually teaching learning retention, so I can say that it didn't go quite that far. I was trying to teach my students how to manipulate learning objectives to self-quiz themselves harder and harder and harder. And so I was using these as levels to how you change a learning objective to make it harder on your cognitive processes. But I brought up this diagram because I wanted you to see that I've done it. I have bought into the myth that this exists, and by now I've learned better, and I hope in this discussion the point is you guys would too. Just a little thing, again, I know you're nosebleed seats and you can't see this, so I'm trying to talk you through all the images that are on my slides, but this does credit the NTL study, National Training Lab study, and the date of this image is 2000. So I just drove us back 20 years now that National Training Lab study existed. Remember, VR didn't exist in 2000. So if anybody's using this diagram to prove that VR is going to be more effective, VR didn't even exist when this diagram was made, okay? In terms of for instructional purposes. Okay, here's my favorite one. We're going to spend a long time on this slide. This is like a quadruple level hot mess, and I went and brought it as my favorite little target spot. As a matter of fact, when I advertised this presentation this morning, this is the one I put on my ad for my talk tonight, because there's just multiple things wrong with this one. So for starters, the title on the slide in the biggest letters says The Cone of Learning. There actually is in the lower right-hand corner a credit to Edgar Dale in 1969. That's probably Edgar Dale's name, and the date is probably the most accurate thing about this slide. Everything else is wrong. For starters, he never called it the Cone of Learning. So the Cone of Learning name has been born somewhere since 1969. He called it the Cone of Experience. Let me double check my notes on that because I checked that earlier today. Yep. He called it the Cone of Experience, and let me see, I'm reading directly from my source on this one. It was meant to convey the gradual loss of sensory information as one moved up the cone. So if you guys are familiar with what this looks like, what happens is at the top, it's saying things like see and hear, and at the bottom, it's saying things like, oh, but there's experiential experiences that we go through, and when we're in those experiential experiences, obviously we will learn more. Yeah, it says doing a dramatic presentation, simulating the real experience, doing the real thing. But what Dale actually meant was that when you do the real experience, you get the most amount of sensory information into your body. So you feel it, you smell it, you taste it, you see it. You're getting that information in. So for example, if I took you guys, literally I just whisked you all up tonight, we drove right past Rochester and went to Detroit, I could give you an in-depth tour in history on the American auto industry, right? I could take you to manufacturing plants, we could meet designers, we could talk about auto design, we could talk about the American auto culture, we could look at efficiency, we could do all kinds of things with cars, and think how much you would learn. As we moved up the cone, basically I give you less and less till we get to the very top of the cone, and as Dale had designed it, Edgar Dale has designed it, at the top of the cone I would only say to you, I would stand right in front of you right now and I would say, automobile. And that would be it. So Dale was making the argument that obviously the first experience I described gives you a lot of sensory information. The last experience I described, saying the word, I don't even show you the word, saying the word in front of you, gives you very little to work from in terms of sensory information. And indeed we know that, right? If you follow the dual channel coding theory from multimedia instruction, we both see and listen as our primary methods of bringing information in, but listening is different from seeing. Listening only involves one sensory channel, our ears. We tend to hear things and think about them as soon as we've heard them, but we don't convert them to other things, whereas sight works differently. When we see the word automobile, we read it with that little voice inside our heads, so it turns into sound at the same time as it appears as a word. And Dale was saying, when you just hear a word, that's basically the least amount of input you're going to get. So can you see how far off this diagram has gotten corrupted? Somewhere around the, I think it was somewhere around the late 60s, 70s, somebody added the percentages on there. Those were never in Dale's original production. They aren't part of it. And as a matter of fact, if you are at all a student of social science, one of the things that should be cluing you in that there's a problem here is all of those percentages are in nice rounded tens. And humans don't come in nice rounded numbers, do we, right? Human numbers for this diagram would be 14%, 27.2, 39, 47, 62, and 112, right? Those would be the messy human numbers that would show up. We are not 10, 20, 50, 70, 90, whatever. Yeah, 10, what is it? 10, 20, 10, 20, 30, 50, 70, 90. We are not in those nice little numbers. More recent versions, since the year 2000, I've seen people add that active and passive thing there. Again, someone looked at this, someone said, I'm going to add it in, let's make it even more. I believe this, so let's make it even more. That was never in the original design. And then, I should point out the after 2 weeks, we tend to remember nice big blue word art letters there on the top. No, right? I picked apart the fact that humans don't appear in rounded numbers by tens. But I also didn't mention, we know retention doesn't work that way either. Retention varies greatly by the learner, by the subject, by the time, by the instructional method. Basically any factor I can give you, retention varies. So there's no such thing as laying one gigantic retention number over the population of the earth. It won't work. And then finally, just to make things perfectly disastrous, they put the quote up in the corner by Confucius, who says, I see and I forget, I hear and I remember, I do and I understand. And I know if you can't see the slide, I want to zoom you in. I'm going to verbally zoom you into one little spot. Again, he says, I see and I forget, I hear and I remember. On the diagram, hearing is higher than seeing, which means less efficient in this version of the diagram. So if you understand what just happened, the Confucius quote now disagrees with the pyramid you see in front of you. I don't know about you guys, but between the two, I'm going to go with Confucius. Now, you're probably sitting out there going, wait a minute, Heather, and I'm like, yeah, I know. I actually double-checked that this morning, too, and it was hilariously funny, because Confucius is never credited with this quote either. So it's really a disaster. Like I said at the beginning, the only thing on this slide that factually holds up is Edgar Dale produced something in a triangle shape in 1969. Nothing else about this works. Yeah. Do you guys find that hard to understand? I find these things hard to bring in sometimes. And I can tell you I've popped in and out of several presentations all through this actual conference, and I've seen 2 people use this diagram in their presentations. And I'm like, I can't make my avatar bend and slink down in her chair, but if I could, I would make my avatar bend and slink down in the chair, because I'd be like, ouch, right? I'd be like, just maybe don't use that quote, right? Just maybe don't use that slide. Okay, this is an infographic that I captured off a Facebook group that I'm a member of. There's a really cool Facebook group called Instructional Designers in Education. A member came in there one day and twice, I've reversed the chronological order of this happening for the slides. Twice a member has come in and posted infographics that look just like this. And again, I know you're in the nosebleed seats, so I'm just going to give you a rough estimate of what this looks like. But it looks legitimately like an infographic, doesn't it? And the top words on the top of it say, let me see if I can get the words on my version, debunking the top 5 common myths of VR in education. I don't know, like, give me some emoticons. Did anybody, is anybody with me and think that VR in education is too young to have myths? I'm like, really? We have myths by now? It's not something that we can, thank you very much. 3 of you got that. 4 of you, thank you. 5, good. Yeah, it's like, we're, myths, right? But anyways, it looks legit, so I'm going to read to you what the myths are here. The first one is that VR requires a heavy investment. Oh my God, you need to spend a lot of money. The second myth is you must have headsets. Got to go buy those headsets. There's no way to engage in VR otherwise. Third one, you cannot build VR yourself. Oh, cough, cough. Isn't this convenient? I'm about to tell you who will build it for you. Number 4, VR cannot complement existing learning. I don't even know who writes these things. And number 5, you cannot track your learners in VR. So if you click on this lovely infographic and see where it takes you, what do you know? It takes you to a company that will sell you VR that they'll make for you. Isn't that handy? Aren't they nice? There's not a single white paper, research paper, or blog at their company website. But they want to put that infographic in front of you to make you believe that there's really legitimate reasons to incorporate VR. So can you tell I get angry when they do that to people in front of me? I'm pro-technology, I'm pro-VR. But if you throw bad research in front of people who are making decisions, they will stop funding the headsets that we do want to get, actually. So you shouldn't toss them things that won't make sense. I said I reversed the chronology. This was actually the first infographic that was plopped onto our feed that got me blisteringly angry with just this image right here. I cut it out. There was actually 5 images in the infographic that they shared. They put that one in front of me, though, and I had a fit. I actually went to LinkedIn, found the president of the company, found the graphic designer that designed this, and I said, seriously? Seriously? Someone wearing a headset running? I went, you are not making me buy your product. This is not, that's a safety hazard, right? I mean, even if you guys look at the film footage that we can get right now of people who are wearing headsets and running on like these Omni treadmills, they're in safety harnesses and they're not even allowed to run very fast. That's the only set of conditions where someone's pretty much allowed to wear a headset like that and have their vision completely blocked off. Safety people all around, a harness is on them. That's the time when you can run with a VR headset on. Any other time, and remember this is a company trying to sell you VR training for your training needs, they are trying to tell you that, hey, wow, you know what, VR can help with your, in this case, I shouldn't be too bitter, but they are trying to give you escape in event of an emergency training through VR. Technically, I want to point out that the idea that it's your first day at work, dawn goggles in training area at work, so that you can literally watch film footage of how you would escape from your workstation out of the building in the event of a fire. So they've run a camera down the route you need to take so that you, as a brand new person who just got to that building, do actually know your escape route. Perfectly valid reason. Do not advertise it showing a picture running with goggles. That was my point. You are ruining it for the rest of us when you show something that's just downright silly. All right, I'll probably regret that someday when this is recorded, but I did not like that ad. Okay, confounding variables. So I'm going to make it worse just a little bit more before I bring us out. All right, so confounding variables are this idea that, generally speaking, for good cause and effect research, you want to make sure that your cause is truly causing your effect. That's going to be a signal of strong research. So to put it in your old science teacher's words, right, it's that you want to be sure that your independent variable caused the changes that you see in your dependent variable. So the dependent variable depends on the independent variable. But that means you can't have other variables coming in and possibly being the cause of what you see as well. And confounding variables are those things that can creep into studies that can sort of contaminate the results. It suddenly makes it so that, wow, you thought you saw this result with your research, but maybe you didn't. And so I want to go through some common confounding variables that do show up in VR research. And I've got 5, okay? And I'm only going to talk these through. There's no slides for these. So the first one is literally the obvious one. VR brings more learning. We just saw those slides. Hey, it's at 75% compared to the 5 and 10. No. That's usually not supported, that VR itself causes more learning. And the reason why that research usually blows up upon really close inspection is because, and some of you know this, I've seen you out there talking on message boards about this, is because whatever they compared VR against to claim that it caused, quote, more learning, was actually poorly designed learning. Okay, so it's an unfair horse race. You would put 2 horses in that are not meant to compete against each other, then the one that wins, and you go, wow, look at that, better horse. And it's like, no, you should not have been competing those 2 items together. As a sub-point to that point, I want to mention, so for example, there's a lot of confounding factors that can show up when, quote, students do better. One of them is, I talked about this a little bit earlier today, it's known as the novelty effect. That means that when students are exposed to something new, it doesn't even matter what it is. The novelty effect takes place, and it tends to mean that the students will gravitate towards the new and do better in the new. That just shows up. It doesn't matter what the new is. When you show them something new, students tend to do better in the new. And the best that I can find for you guys to know, the novelty effect lasts approximately 1 year. So if you're getting VR headsets for your students now, and you want to tell your principal that their scores went up by June, of course their scores are going to go up by June. What you need to know is if the same student scores go up June of next year. Do you understand? Right? They need to be experiencing those headsets for a long time for the novelty effect to wear off. By the way, little asterisk to that. Don't forget, every single day that we live on planet Earth right now, it's becoming more saturated with XR, so the novelty effect will wash away eventually. Okay, so everyone will be so used to XR that it won't be a factor. So the day will come when I will not give speeches and talk about the novelty effect with XR anymore. The next item is, I mentioned it a little bit more, is uncontrolled instructional methods. So they tend to compare XR against another form of instruction, and they didn't bother to make that other form of instruction to be as close as possible to the XR form of instruction. Okay, so there's a little hole in the wall there, right? There's a little place to go, Heather. Hopefully if I can remember, I'll come back to that in a minute. But that's one of the secret spots that you can actually get successful research through. But legitimately, if someone's claiming to you that VR does better learning, the thing you'll probably find when you look at their research is that they simply did not compare like forms of instruction. This just happened to me last year. I had someone in the industry of XR approach me and ask for me to endorse his product as being a better form of learning so that my endorsement would help companies go purchase the product that he makes more often. And he said to me, would you be willing to say a statement like, my XR learning it will provide better learning outcomes than, say, paper and pencil? And I said, I will not endorse that. And he said, why? I said, because they're not cognitively similar, right? Paper and pencil is a massively different cognitive load than VR. So no, I would never sign my name to an endorsement that would say that. Now, ask me to compare VR to, say, a simulation or choose your own adventure strategized group of videos. Now we're talking much more similar cognitive demands on the learner. And if you can show me that you get learning improvements with that group, now I'm more interested. All right, second myth or confounding variable that often shows up in VR research. VR is more motivating for my learners. Heather, you don't understand. I can get more learners engaged than I can before. I have 14 10-year-olds who won't give math any attention, but when I put the headset on and there's a math lesson in there, they are off to the races. And I would say to you, no, they're not. Right? We tend to look into motivation as it relates to VR, and what we discover is that the learner is probably got some intrinsic motivation that was there that VR just basically stoked. So, for example, they may be kids playing VR games at home, right? They may have just hit their stride in math class at age 10. They just may be starting to grow. So, it's not something that we can pull apart. For the adult learners, I want to point out that you don't get out of jail on this one, because what happens is that we are still in the time right now where VR tends to actually attract the motivated learners. So if you're structuring college level experiences with VR, you're probably pulling in the top 10 to 20% of motivated learners in your college who are coming in to check it out. They're like, what's this, right? So you're not going to get a clean sample is kind of what I'm saying with that. Third one. Oh, but Heather, VR addresses different learning styles. Oh, we could do a whole other conference on not talking about learning styles, so I won't talk much about that. I'm just going to leave it with, and some other people have said this much to my relief in this conference, the human brain is amazingly plastic. When you put it under a variety of high-stress situations, it will perform. So when you see people go into what is admittedly an extremely intense visual environment, or bring in multiple senses, bring in smell-o-vision, bring in haptic bodysuits, the human brain's going to do a good job of adapting to that and showing you that it can succeed. That does not mean it was the better form of research, better form of learning to use with your students. So be careful when it comes to learning styles. Number 4. Heather, VR is active learning, meaning the students can manage and control their own learning, right? They get the headset on, they have an avatar, they're walking around in space, they're touching things, they're moving things, they're dealing with stuff. They can take the headset off whenever they feel like it. Obviously, this causes more learning. No, it does not. As a matter of fact, when it comes to active learning and intense learning environments, the research actually shows an inversion, meaning the more you expose people to more sensory information, truly the harder it is for them to pull out what you wanted them to pull out of the experience. And I think you can get that, right? I've been sitting in the audience this week through this conference, and I'm sitting right where you guys are sitting, because all these rooms are the same, and look at this intense space. Unless you knew how to behave in a conference situation, you wouldn't know to look at the person standing on the stage, not stare at the posters on the wall, not look at the traffic zooming by outside. We're asking our learners to walk into a situation like this and still focus on us and an algebra lesson? No, right? It gets harder and harder the more immersive that you make it. So that can be a confounding factor as well. Let's see. The last one, and believe it or not, I've reached a point where I'm struggling to read my own notes. Let me see. It provides, hold on, learner control. I'm trying to read what I actually wrote here. Yeah, I'm going to skip it. All right, last slide. I'll probably figure out what that word is in like a minute. So the point is to not lose hope. I brought us all down to the ground, I hope, in the field of XR research, and the idea was not to lose hope, and that more research is needed. Every single research study that you guys can craft is necessary, and I'm going to give you an example of what I mean. Let's pretend out there in the next couple of months, you're going to see a study by a 7th grade biology teacher who used VR in her classroom, and she got improved score results with her students that are 7th graders in a biology lesson. And 2 minutes worth of VR exposure. I'm quoting that because I've actually seen research in just the last few weeks that was just like this. And you're going to find it, and you're going to say, that's great, but I'm 8th grade biology, and I need to talk my principal into buying these headsets. It's the study on 8th grade biology that we need, and I hope you will understand that the 7th grade biology study can only really be applied to 7th graders in that culture and in that geography, really. So do a research study on your 8th graders. Show the 7th grade research study to your principal. If it's nice and solid, hopefully I've taught you some things to look for. You want to look for just the regular smart things that are present in research hygiene. You want to look for who were the participants. What did they want to find out in this study? What methods did they use? What data did they collect? Did they do any statistical work on the data? Is it qualitative data instead? Good research hygiene will keep you in a good place for these studies when you're trying to seek funding for things. And where does the research right now, Heather, indicate that VR has lots of potential, right? I've saved that for the very end here. The answer is there's 3 areas where it's zooming ahead. It beats the competitors. And the first area where it zooms ahead is time. It saves time. So I said a minute ago that badly designed VR or XR research usually designs a bad instructional process up against VR and then says, voila, the VR is better. Isn't that awesome? But the trick is that most instructors don't have time to deliver an equivalent experience to, let's say, hypothetically, all 25 of her classroom students. Whereas she can squirrel away 3, 4, or 5 of her students, put headsets on them, and they, because of efficiency here, they can actually get better learning outcomes because she doesn't have to sit down and give those 5 people individualized instruction that's at the same equal level that the VR headsets are giving them. So it's the time to learn is decreased. The time that expert teachers would need to employ otherwise is involved. Plus, and I know some of you out there, I'm sort of like reading the mind of some of my audience, don't forget that the metrics of volume are on our side when it comes to XR. And a really good XR application only has to be designed once and it can be used 1,000,000 times. That's a tremendous increase in time and efficiency. These are the places where VR is winning. VR is also winning in money. So everything I just described in time can be translated to money. Eventually it'll be money. I know some of you are saying, Heather, headsets are expensive. I've been listening to some of these other futurists that have been talking, Tom and Charlie, in some of these earlier presentations this week. They're all saying it's going to come faster and quicker than we can possibly imagine. How much we'll basically be wearing something that looks and feels just like glasses, and that will be the XR experience that we're all used to. I completely agree with them. The last place where XR wins when we put it up against research, and it wins every time, is providing more access. Probably my favorite spot. Time and money I can get by. Access makes me happy, which means we can get more learners into more learning situations that they couldn't get into before. So as an example, I could get about 10 of your favorite students and we could bundle it together $1 zillion, and I could take them to the moon and teach them some really cool astronomical stuff about the moon up there. But it takes a lot of money, a lot of time, and it's close to impossible for me to take them there right now. I can take them to the moon in XR next week, easily. So it provides access. Don't forget, access also means in terms of geography, culture, ability. There's a wide range of access that opens. And when we put XR up against access and competing against its next closest competitors, it's always winning in those situations. So there's your hope, right? There's hope. All right. I'm just going to wrap and then we'll go to questions here in a second. So I want to remind you that I'm actually also here a bit representing, if you can kind of turn over to that poster on the wall from the Immersive Learning Research Network, the white poster with the ball that looks like it's covered in light blue spots. I'm actually associated with that organization, and I'm the practitioner co-chair for the 2020 conference. It's actually going to be happening in California. And I wanted to put out a reminder to everybody here that we are looking for practitioner research proposals right now. So 7th grade teachers, corporate trainers, college instructional designers, all of you folks are the ones that we are looking for your proposals, particularly if you're in the western part of the United States. I do encourage you to consider putting in a proposal because the conference is going to be in San Luis Obispo, California in June. And for you, I'm envious. It will be kind of cool for you to get there. For me, from New York, possibly covered wagons will be involved. So, but I'll be there. But I am going to start using my social networks to put out a reminder that the call for proposals is open for that conference right now. I'm also on LinkedIn and I'm on Twitter, and I made sure that the picture of me for my profile here in AltSpace matches the same social media picture I used in those sources. So if you find the blonde person standing in front of a periodic table, that's me, and I welcome your links and your tweets in my direction. Okay, Michael. Are you there, Michael? I can't even see you. Oh, there you are. Yes. We can take probably some questions now.
Yep. So, hey, everyone. We've got about 5 minutes before we have to start getting the next speaker set up, but no worries if we don't get to your question. Afterwards, we can go to the social space where you can talk with Heather Moore. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to allow hand raise. And if you have a question, click on the bottom right raise hand button, and then we'll be able to select you.
I just noticed I can raise my hand too.
Yeah, Ron's up.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Oh. Is that someone else? No? Okay. I've stunned you with everything I said. You're like, oh, I can't go on. I'll bring us to the last slide just so that I lost my connection. If there is anyone else who's secretly controlling my slides, we could get us to, well, actually, you know what, I'll just try. Oh, wait, I'm back.
Hey, Jim, it looks like you have a question.
There we go.
Go ahead and accept the microphone.
Thank you, Michael. Heather.
Yes.
I was involved for about a 3 or 4 year period many years ago with a nonprofit organization, and I was surrounded by researchers, which was amazing because I learned so much. One of the challenges they had is that their research it's really a factor. The research was impacted by who was paying for the research.
Oh yeah.
It shouldn't be that way, but in a perfect world it is, and a lot of times they had to struggle with the amount of quote-unquote bias that was in their findings. Could you comment on some strategies you've engaged to deal with that, to manage that?
To deal with the bias. Yeah. So say, oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Nope, that was it. Okay. To deal with the bias when, let's say, for example, you're receiving some sort of sponsorship that requires certain devices or something like that. Yeah. Well, for starters, you'd obviously, the first thing you'd have to do is disclose that that's the bias that's going on. And one of the things we know about research that's written into good research is there's always a section where your biases should be disclosed, and it should be disclosed that when you finished the research, what factors sort of did confound, because there's always unexpected things that happen. And a good research report, regardless of where it comes out of, should admit its weaknesses. Okay, it should have a whole section where it says, we realize that we could only use our office staff as participants, or we realize that we were only studying, students in Central California, or we realized that, or whatever. Like, it should have a section where it does disclose its weaknesses. That's going to really increase the ability for people to read that report and understand that it shouldn't generate headlines like we saw on some of my earlier slides. Another thing that's in there is, again, that idea of well-designed research. Come with me kind of on this sort of like mental experiment. This is a thought experiment for just a minute. Well-designed research when you're competing two very similar methods up against each other, which is exactly how it should be designed if you want to quote, unquote, say something is better, right? When you design instruction to be very, very similar experiences to each other, it's going to be completely normal that you get no statistical significance between the two methods. That's actually the expected result. If you put one student under one cognitive burden and another student under a different but similar cognitive burden, it's going to get harder and harder and harder to tease out a statistically significant difference. That actually is considered good. I know it's hard to accept because all these manufacturers want research saying their product is the best, their product is the most efficient, their product is the one everybody should buy. Yeah, I would just say disclose your weaknesses, and that would make me look up further on the research. I will always be able to look at it and say, okay, so you only used device A and you were restricted to device A, but that's okay. As long as you told me I knew I was restricted to device A, that will help me. I hope that answers your question, Jim. Yes, there's more questions. I can see them waiting. Oh my goodness.
So Heather, we do have to get the other speakers set up very soon, but
Sure.
Would it be okay if you go to the, we have like a portal in the back that allows you to go to the social space and people can follow you if they have further questions?
That would be wonderful, only I'm going to nickname the social space the bar. So if anybody wants to meet me in the bar, that's where I'm going to go.
All right, everyone. I'd like to thank again all the volunteers who helped with this event. So thank you again to Megan, Ron, David, and then as well as our wonderful speaker. Please give her another round of emojis.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Look, I'm going to turn. This is the only thing I can do. Whee! Okay. Thanks, everybody. Okay.
All right, Ron, I'll turn it over to you then for the next event.
Okay, thank you, Michael. Amy, you want to come down here so we can set up your slides? Amy, there you are. Are you using slides.com or Google Slides or what? Okay,
Hey,
if you're
Daniel.
talking, I can't hear you.
Hear me now?
Oh, there you are. Yes.
Hi. Yes, I do on slides.com. They should have everything.
What's up, Tim?
Ron,
Did you want me to operate the slide deck for you?
Do you mind? Yes, because
Hey.
I have an older headset that I borrowed from the office, and I'm having some
How you doing?
slight issues with syncing.
Good, how are
everything.
you?
Yeah, yeah, not too bad.
And
It's,
What
it's
did I
10 to 1 in
miss?
the morning here, so
What did I miss? What was this event about?
turn this up.
it was about XR design basically, and
Oh, okay.
and how you can affect students and different myths that you
Okay.
can bust. It was quite interesting.
Oh,
Very good.
yeah. I totally missed it. I haven't been online.
So how's
But
things,
hold-
alright?
Yeah. Let me go talk to Daniel. I'll be right back.
Yeah, sure.
Daniel.
There we go. Now I can see you guys.
Hey, Daniel.
I'm sorry, no, I don't know where her slides are.
Okay. Can I message it to you on Discord? Would that work?
Daniel.
Yeah, sure.
Daniel's not here. Okay. I think Daniel's AFK.
Can you guys hear me
He's
okay?
probably wandered off. He's in most of the session.